In battles of old, the color guard led the charge. These guardsmen braved the enemy fire to inspire their fellow warriors to victory. Escorting the colors of the United States of America is the United States Air Force Honor Guard. This 220-member unit is made up of ceremonial guardsmen from various career fields that have served in military conflicts and humanitarian efforts throughout the world. Marching before you with pride is the Air Force's best, the Air Force Honor Guard. A distinctive feature of military ceremonies is the formal presentation of command to the reviewing official. After the commander of troops presents the command, musical honors will be played in honor of Secretary Wilson. Please remain standing for the advancement of the colors, the singing of our national anthem, and the invocation. The Air Force Chief of Chaplains, Chaplain Major General Stephen A. Scheich, will now deliver the invocation.
Madam Secretary, as you know, the words I'm about to offer are a joint effort between your pastor and your chaplain. Indeed, Reverend Grace Hahn's fingerprints are all over these words. Let us pray. Loving God, we give you thanks and praise for life and liberty in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And this afternoon, our gratitude zeroes in on the Heather Wilson story, a story only you could have written. Little did she know, at the ripe old age of 4, her training to be our SecAF got its start. Sitting on a stack of pillows, sporting a big old smile, she took to the skies with her father and his Piper Cub. Her grandfather continued the training with countless stories of barnstorming. And everyone knows that no preparation to be the SecAF could be complete without success in academia, the halls of Congress, and of course, mastering the banjo. We give thanks for this humble leader and for every time she heard your call and said, "Here I am, Lord, send me." And just as Jesus blessed those who used their talents to bless others, so too we honor the work of Secretary Wilson, who used her talents to craft a faster, more ready and lethal Air Force. Guide her, we pray, in all that is to come, and help those UTEP minors get ready for a major league president. And finally, may Secretary Wilson and her husband Jay hear from you and from us loud and clear, "Well done, thy good and faithful servants." For we pray this in the name of the one from whom all blessings flow. Amen.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, General Goldfein.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome as we honor our Secretary of the Air Force, Dr. Heather Wilson, and pay tribute to her leadership, her vision, and her unwavering passion for airmen, that when taken together have been a driving force for positive change. And thank you to so many who made this ceremony possible, from our spectacular honor guard in formation. You look great, by the way. To the world's greatest defenders, standing guard in this year of the Defender. To our incredible band, and to the members of the protocol team and the staff who pulled it all together. And nothing speaks to our adversaries like a B-2. Wouldn't you hate to see that coming at you? So thanks to General Jacobson and Team Andrews and Team Whiteman for putting together an incredible display here in this hangar. We couldn't ask for a more perfect afternoon in the National Capital Region. So it's my honor to perform the role of Welcomer-in-Chief. And so to begin, we're honored to welcome back 3 former Secretaries of the Air Force. Secretary 19, the Honorable Whit Peters. Secretary 21, the Honorable Michael Wynn. And Secretary 22, the Honorable Mike Donnelly. Gentlemen, welcome back to Big Blue. And thank you for joining today's tribute to your successor, number 24. To our Vice Chairman and Dawn's and my next-door neighbor, General Paul and Ricky Selva, thank you for your years of service and leadership. You've been a steady hand and a calming influence in this role. just as you have throughout your 39-year career. Sir, thank you for being here. So a special welcome to the close friends and the family of our secretary. We're so glad to share this afternoon with you. And Dawn and I so enjoyed having you over to the Air House last night to honor the Wilson and the Hone families. And of course, to the steady soul of the family, Jay. Thank you for your service, both as a former airman and a JAG, but especially as Dawn's wingman during the last 24 months. We're so grateful to have gained you as a close friend, and in one case, as a fellow security detail ditcher. We will never forget wandering through London, enjoying the scenery as our security team scrambled to figure out where we were. And that may have been the first time, Madam Secretary, that you realized that ground ops is not my strength. So for me and Dawn, every day in uniform is a reminder what an honor and a privilege it is to serve and lead our amazing airmen. 685,000 active Guard, Reserve, and civilians who stand the watch and provide top cover for the nation and our joint and allied teammates. And the highlight has been performing this sacred duty with our boss, the 24th Secretary of the Air Force, Dr. Heather Wilson. When I'm asked the difference between what it was like to be the Vice Chief and being the Chief, I tell folks it's the walk down Arnold Corridor in the Pentagon, or what we affectionately know as the glass doors, where the top 5 live, and where paintings of all the former secretaries and chiefs hang on the wall. So you see, when you're the Vice Chief, all the portraits of the former chiefs smile at you as you walk towards your office. But when you become the Chief and you walk those same steps, their eyes move like a Harry Potter movie. But there's an important story on those walls. Because the Secretary and Chiefs teams in our past who have made the most lasting contributions recognized that it took both the civilian and the military leaders working together as a team to make a difference. Because neither one alone can bring lasting change. It's the ultimate team contact sport, and a relationship that both must work equally hard at to establish a level of trust and confidence that the institution deserves. And the relationship that we have built together over the last 2 years is the most rewarding of my career. And I have truly enjoyed working with, for, and learning from you. If we were to script out the perfect background for an Air Force Secretary, I don't think we could do any better. Growing up in Keene, New Hampshire, she and her brothers would often share a bedroom as their father was building an experimental open cockpit biplane in her bedroom. So she spent weekends in the hangars at either the Dillon Hopkins or Harvey Sawyer's Airport, where flying in their father's vintage J-3 Cub was always a crowd favorite for the Wilson kids. Her grandfather, George Scotty Wilson, was a Royal Air Force pilot who served in World War I and then transitions to serve in the New Hampshire Civil Air Patrol during World War II, and later became one of its first wing commanders. So what an honor it was earlier this year to participate in a ceremony when the Civil Air Patrol honored her grandfather as one of the founding members of this great organization that still inspires young men and women to learn to fly today. Dr. Wilson's passion for challenges continued throughout high school, finding time for extracurricular activities like Vice President of the Student Council, President of the Debate Club, and a saxophone player. And I just learned recently, a banjo player in the school band. So when she applied for the Air Force Academy and joined the 3rd class with women all seemed right in the world. Over 4 decades ago, Secretary Wilson and I stood shoulder to shoulder in the field house at the Air Force Academy and took our first oath together. After graduation, our careers took different paths. And to keep the trend going, Secretary Wilson today is once again graduating with honors a year ahead of me. She's a Rhodes Scholar and attained her PhD in International Relations at Oxford University. And after serving in the Air Force, she went on to join the National Security Council as a policy leader for President George H.W. Bush. She managed the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Warsaw Pact, and the start of Operation Desert Storm. Several years later, she went on to win election as a congresswoman from New Mexico for 10.5 years and became a powerful advocate for us on the Hill, especially, I'm told, when she wore her lucky debate blazer. This is also when we rejoined again, when I served as the wing commander at Holloman Air Force Base. I'll never forget visiting her office with the Alamogordo Committee of 50 civic leaders. Groups were lined up and down the hall to see her, and we were ushered in for our 15 minutes of fame. From the moment we walked in the room, we were made to feel like the most important people on the planet, a true representative of the people, and my classmate. Little did we know our paths would cross again so many years later at the Pentagon. And just prior to rejoining the formation, Secretary Wilson served for 4 years as president of the South Dakota School of Mines, where she oversaw the expansion of academic programs and PhD opportunities. Of the many skills she brought to the position, I believe strengthening our people, programs for airmen and families, will be her most lasting legacy. What a great tribute last night by our A1 to name a scholarship in her name for 3 captains every year to go to school for their PhDs. Upon taking office, Secretary Wilson set our 5 force priorities: restoring readiness, cost-effectively modernize, drive innovation, develop exceptional leaders, and strengthen our alliances, setting the conditions to build the Air Force we need for the future fight that's coming. She drove a comprehensive review of Air Force regulations, which led to the reduction of over 330 instructions and rewriting the rest, and get this, in English. In her conference room was a glass jar we named the acronym jar. And at a buck an acronym, let's just say we all contributed to the Director of Snacko Fund over the past 2 years. Her efforts in tackling acquisition reform and bringing the future faster helped empower program managers to get capability to the warfighter at the speed of relevance, as well as sparked the rollout of our new science and technology strategy. She set a goal of stripping 100 years from our acquisition process during her tenure, and of making a program manager position the best job in the Air Force. And as we often said together, as an executive team, we rarely added value to a decision, but we sure did add time. So pushing decision authority down the chain has been a signature element of our work together. So how appropriate last night that Dr. Roper announced that we hit the mark this week, 100.3 days removed, as he then announced an annual award in Secretary Wilson's name that'll be presented to the top program manager in the Air Force. And I believe members of Congress would attest that Secretary Wilson's willingness to engage drove a respectful and appropriate dialogue to ensure the Air Force was moving in the right direction and that we properly consulted the representatives of the American people, who we so proudly serve. She strengthened the trust, the transparency, and the support among the White House, Capitol Hill, our civic leaders, and our industry partners. She also instilled unprecedented levels of inter-service cooperation by initiating frequent meetings with her fellow service secretaries. As she often said, if you work together, you can get a heck of a lot done. And this pattern of working together moved us forward as a stronger joint warfighting team. And serving as the principal Department of Defense advisor on space, Secretary Wilson accelerated the transition of space capabilities from an uncontested to a contested domain and secured support for double-digit % increases in the space budget 2 years in a row. And of all her accomplishments leading our formation, here is the heart and soul of Secretary Heather Wilson. She loves airmen, and airmen love her back. Her priority has always been with people and improving their quality of service and their quality of life. During her tenure, she oversaw the most significant reform of talent management in over 30 years, driving deliberate development and overhauling both the evaluation and the assignment processes for our airmen. Even in her last week as secretary, running through the tape, she's been a steady force behind establishing new officer development to help optimize the disciplines needed for joint warfighting in our 386 operational squadrons and the combat support and the combat service support that we need to fight and win. So how fitting that her final act as our secretary will be where our journey started over 40 years ago at the Air Force Academy, where the President of the United States will deliver the commencement address next week. Madam Secretary, displayed before you in this hangar are our nation's instruments of war and of peace and hope. The flag you have so proudly served, and the airmen standing tall in formation who have proudly followed your lead. 3 times in your career, you have taken the same solemn oath. First as a cadet in the class of 1982, then as a congresswoman and representative of the people, and finally as our 24th Secretary of the Air Force. Sacred duty, characterized best in a quote you and I memorized as cadets. Duty is the sublimest word in the English language. You should do your duty in all things. You can never do more. You should never wish to do less. Madam Secretary, it is my distinct honor on behalf of a grateful nation, your family, your friends, and all you have served with over the past 37 years, to state that you have once again completed your obligation to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you have borne true faith and allegiance to the same, and that you have well and faithfully
fan of change. Decisiveness and change are both pretty central to who my mom is and how she works. One of the only things my dad might like even less than change would be the humility to move across the country to support my mom in this effort. Another calling at another time, another place. While here, he found other ways to serve, volunteering at the Smithsonian, helping out with a local Boy Scout troop, hosting get-togethers for service secretaries or other distinguished guests. Mrs. Goldfein, your welcoming embrace was deeply appreciated by all of us, but by my dad especially. Just a couple of weeks ago, the 3 service secretaries signed a directive to review the barriers to spouse employment on overseas bases. It came from a trip my mom took to Aviano. The truth is, it was my dad. He traveled with her and got the scoop on the problems folks were facing. People talked to him. He asked good questions. He listened. He understood. He told my mom, and my mom started fixing things. That's what they do. Dad, thanks for making breakfast every week before church for the past 2 years for Rachel and I. We're going to miss Sunday mornings. The food, the company, the laughter, whether retelling one of the jokes you've been telling for all of my life, or recounting something that Secretary Spencer had said the week before. I'm thankful I've had the opportunity to live in the same part of the country as you both during this chapter of my young adult life. I didn't expect it, I didn't ask for it, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. Dad, on behalf of all of those here and the many more who were not, thank you for having served. Thank you for using your gifts, and good luck and Godspeed escaping the humidity of DC. West Texas might have been an overcorrection, but what can you do? My mom describes her management style, her perspective on leadership in an executive role, as being values-driven, mission-focused, and people-oriented. People matter, and the people in this room and the airmen serving around the world are why my mom leads the way she does. You are who my mom is oriented towards when she wakes up in the morning every day in this role. You're protecting the freedoms we all enjoy, and serving you has been her calling. Team 24, Allie and Ben and Laura, Christina, Rudy, Nikki and Rex, Colonel Telly and Poison Iverson, and everyone else, you've made a tangible impact on the Air Force by using time effectively right down to the wire. By running a top-notch operation in everything from moving paper to telling a more compelling story about the needs of the Air Force to stakeholders in industry and on the Hill. To the security team, who with your professionalism and sense of humor helped us all transition to and become comfortable with a part of the job that is very different for us. And you certainly make it very easy to get out of the Air Force Navy football game in record time. To family from all over, those who are here today and for those that couldn't make it, thank you for being a loving part of this journey. General Goldfein, watching you two work together is a sight to behold. Your service to your country and your partnership with my mom has made the last 2 years not just far more effective than they would have been otherwise, which is undoubtedly true, but also deeply meaningful. You two have known each other since your time at the academy, but the collaboration, and most importantly, the friendship that's developed while serving together, from my vantage point, I'm certain it will last a lifetime. It will serve as a model for all of us for a lifetime. You have made all of our lives richer by your leadership and by your friendship. My mom is mission-focused. Anybody who has worked with her can attest to this, and the outcomes for airmen are apparent and have been addressed by others here: readiness, space, rapid acquisition, review of the Air Force instructions, science and technology strategy. It's her ability to tune out the noise, to insulate her team from the nonsense, that sets her apart in this town. She doesn't let ego get in the way of folks doing good work on behalf of the country. As focused as she is on the mission, she doesn't take herself too seriously. My mom is one of the goofiest people I know. If there's snow, she'll wait at the stoop with a pile of snowballs. She never passes up an opportunity to take a amateur photograph of a silly-looking car or absurd names of European budget airlines. I love her sense of humor, even though she's not always the best at telling jokes, though I think, General Goldfein, you've helped her with that over the last 2 years. There's been a notable improvement. For most of my life, she'd tell the punchline, laugh, and then spend a couple of minutes explaining why that really should have been quite funny. Just in the last few months, we should have been thrown out of church a couple of times for fits of giggles at, let's say, inopportune times. We have a very, very tolerant pastor. Perhaps most importantly, my mom is values-driven. Integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do, the core values of the United States Air Force. These were certainly imparted to her in their specificity during her time at the Air Force Academy, but they must have been part of who she was before taking the one-way plane ticket from home. What I find most telling of her character, though, is how she often goes on to explain those values. She's quick to point out that excellence is not perfection, that there is nothing perfect on this side of the New Jerusalem. For her, integrity and service need no explanation. They're a given. Nothing perfect on this side of the New Jerusalem. To me, this brings to mind echoes of what I have always felt to be the most beautiful oxymoron in our American vernacular. More perfect. An acknowledgement of something exceptional, yet a categorical assertion that to strive, to struggle, to fix, to tinker is at our core, is our duty. I am deeply glad and profoundly grateful for the example my mom has set, driven by her values, the self-evident integrity, the unmistakable will to serve, the dutiful explanation of our calling to strive for excellence. When I was 5 years old, my mom wrote to me a letter from the floor of the United States House of Representatives. She was grappling with a tough decision and was reflecting. She wanted us to know why she chose a path in public life. The letter was tucked away in a box, and I only read it many years later. The crux of it: she wants to leave to us an America that is worthy of our dreams. She went on, imperfect and always falling short because it is populated by fallible men and women, but glowing brightly with an idealism and spirit undimmed by over 200 years of toil. Idealism and spirit undimmed sounds a lot to me like laughter silvered wings. We are grateful that she has served in this time, in this place, among the bicycle mechanics, the tinkerers, here in the United States Air Force.
Please rise as General Goldfein presents the Department of Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service to Secretary Wilson, read by Secretary Wilson's son, Mr. Josh Hone.
For exceptional service as the 24th Secretary of the Air Force, Pentagon, Washington, District of Columbia, from 8 May 2017 through 31 May 2019. During this period, Secretary Wilson exhibited exceptional executive leadership that focused on the Air Force restoring the readiness of the force to win any fight, any time, resulting in substantial increases in readiness of operational squadrons. She guided work to plan and advocate for a larger and stronger service to execute the National Defense Strategy and build support for that vision. Secretary Wilson enabled the implementation of acquisition reform by delegating authority to empower program managers to get capability to the warfighter faster and directed the development of a new science and technology strategy. Serving as the principal Department of Defense advisor on space, Secretary Wilson accelerated the transition of space capabilities from an uncontested domain and secured support for double-digit percentage increases in the space budget 3 years in a row. The distinctive accomplishments of Secretary Wilson reflect the highest credit upon herself and the United States Air Force.
Please remain standing as General Goldfein presents the Chief of Staff of the Air Force Award for Exceptional Public Service to Mr. J. Hone, read by Mr. Josh Hone.
Mr. J.R. Hone distinguished himself by exceptional service to the United States Air Force as the spouse of the Secretary of the Air Force from 10 May 2017 to 30 May 2019. His dedication to the entire Air Force community directly contributed to the successful tenure of his spouse as Secretary of the Air Force. During this period, he tirelessly advocated for the needs of our Air Force families and promoted critical support programs that improved the quality of life and service for thousands of members of the Air Force family. Alongside the Secretary, Mr. Hone participated in multiple leadership panels and Air Force town hall meetings, clearly articulating the challenges total force airmen and their families face, including suicide prevention and sexual assault prevention. He works closely with the Second Lady of the United States and her staff on military family issues, including an initiative pushing states to change their laws on reciprocity for military spouse trade and professional licensing. A staunch champion of programs including the well-being of Air Force communities, Mr. Hone served on the Service Council for USO and consistently participated in events honoring Air Force heroes, including his unique platform to highlight resources available to military families. Mr. Hone's dedication in support of the United States Armed Forces and military families highlights his patriotism and reflects great credit upon himself, his family, and the United States Air Force.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the posting of the colors. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. J. Hone.
Jack Benny once received a significant civic award, and he accepted it while saying that he knew he had done nothing deserving it. But he said he accepted it because he had a bad back. He said he equally knew he had done nothing to deserve the bad back. So he learned to take the good with the bad. I can identify with that today. But I accept this with great humility, and I'm greatly honored by it because I know I'm standing here representing a majority of the Air Force family that is not compensated, because the majority of the Air Force family are the spouses and children. And every day, they support the mission of the Air Force by supporting their uniformed member of their family. And every week, every month, year after year, assignment after assignment. It may have been living in an exotic place that they never thought they'd get to live in. It may be their first choice, or it may be somewhere after their 24th choice of places to live. It may be at a time when their extended family needs them and they can't be there because they're supporting the mission and their immediate Air Force family. I joined the Air Force family 48 years ago this month. 1971, I joined Air Force ROTC. My continued involvement was pretty much guaranteed by a selective service system that drew me a lottery number of 14 the year they took through 49. But I have never regretted any of my Air Force time and associations. I am so proud of my Air Force family. Even the secretary. There are two things that from my first month in Air Force ROTC till now that have constantly evolved and yet never changed. The two focuses, the Air Force mission and the Air Force family. May it always be so. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Secretary Wilson.
Let me start by saying thank you to those of you who put this day together, to those of you who took the time to come, and to all of you for serving. I also want to thank my family, particularly Jay. I'm married to an intelligent, funny, and kind of private guy who has supported me in a very public life, including chapters that we did not plan and could not have anticipated. I live a blessed life. A few weeks ago, I met with our command chiefs, and I shared with them some reflections on leadership in the Air Force, because they asked me, what I had learned over the last 2 years. And I thought I might share a version of those thoughts with you as I retire from the service. Every one of you in this hangar, every single one, are leaders. Leaders of large teams and small, civilian, military. The values that military service develops all relate to leadership from the first day we raise our hands to serve. Here's what I think I discovered over the last few years. Everything I needed to know about leading the Air Force, I learned gardening in 4-H. Our family had a really large garden out in back of our house, and tending it and doing yard work was part of our chores as kids. So, what are the 10 rules I learned in that garden that may apply to you as leaders of the most powerful Air Force on the planet? First, start with a plan. If you don't start with a plan, you're going to run out of space. You risk having too many radishes and not enough room for the cucumbers. 2 years ago, we started with 5 goals. The Secretary of Defense and the priorities of the President were pretty clear, it seemed to me, and we looked at the general challenges the Air Force faced and decided what the big things were we had to do. Restore the readiness of the force, cost-effectively modernize, drive innovation, develop exceptional leaders, and build our alliances. If you're a leader, you have to set the direction. If you're a gardener, you need to start with a plan. Second, it's more fun to garden with friends, and you get more done. Gardening's a lot of work, and if you do it together with people you like or people you're willing to get to know, the work is easier. One of the joys of this job has been the unprecedented partnership with Secretary Spencer of the Navy and Secretary Esper of the Army. And I will deeply miss my partnership with Chief of Staff Dave Goldfein. I've worked with and for a lot of great leaders, presidents and generals and governors and CEOs and scientists. Dave Goldfein is hands down one of the best I have ever worked with in my life. And it's not just him. It's our assistant secretaries and every deputy chief of staff, without exception, who has made clear to everyone who is watching that we as airmen are in this together as a team. You know, I am always surprised at how many people inside and outside our service, in the Pentagon and throughout Washington, have commented on the teamwork and fellowship evident in our Air Force and on what we call the fourth deck of the Pentagon. Up there, we are cooking with kerosene. It's more fun to garden with friends. Third, you have to let your friends help decide what you plant. You know, I wasn't very fond of eggplant as a kid, and I didn't know what kohlrabi was, and I still don't. But people need a stake in what they're doing. When General Goldfein and I were completely aligned from the very beginning on the importance of revitalizing squadrons and developing joint leaders and teams. But I have to admit, I had no idea 2 years ago what the heck multi-domain command and control was. But I knew that it was important to him, and I respected his judgment and his experience. I also think it's probably fair to say that General Goldfein is not nearly as passionate as I am about science and technology strategy. But it's a big garden, and we can do more together when friends help decide what to plant. The fourth rule of gardening is you have to plant in the right soil. You have to put the corn in the end where it's a little more sandy and where the sun shines. Likewise, we have to find the right people and the right teams who embrace problems and own solutions as leaders in the Air Force. I am still amazed at the quality and depth of the readiness recovery plan that the 50 airmen from around the world pulled together for us. The same is true of the sustainment strategy that General Barry and his team have just finished, and the 100-day review of our strategy on space, and the infrastructure investment plan that John Henderson and his crew put together that will change the way we support our bases for decades, and the talent management tools that General Kelly and Sean Manasco have brought to the force. The seeds of all this work are planted deeply and in the right places. If you're going to be a successful gardener, you have to plant in the right soil. Fifth, you have to weed a lot. Weeding isn't fun, but if you're going to let some of the carrots grow to be healthy, you have to take out some of those little sprouts. You know, it may seem kind of silly, but one thing I'm most proud of is the team of lawyers and air staff members that has been getting rid of the out-of-date, overly prescriptive Air Force regulations that were stunting the growth, not of carrots, but of airmen. We rescinded over 340 unnecessary instructions and rewrote almost 500 more. As a leader, you have to get rid of the things that don't matter in order to make room for the things that do. If you're going to have a healthy garden, you have to weed a lot. The sixth rule of gardening is to plant more than you can eat. At harvest time, you'll have extra to share with neighbors, and the relationships fostered over tomatoes and extra summer squash will make the neighborhood stronger and safer. We are a wealthy and powerful country. We are stronger when we engage our allies and partners and make room for them in our exercises, our schools, and our cockpits. Planting more than you can eat strengthens the neighborhood. Seventh, as a gardener, you have to be prepared to be tough with the mean kids in the neighborhood. Seems like every neighborhood has some mean kids who want to tear things up, sometimes for no reason at all, and sometimes they have dogs, and sometimes they're kind of sneaky. Even if you don't feel particularly tough, as a leader, you have to be willing to stand up to people, to protect their work and the work going on in your organization. And if you're willing to stand up to those mean kids, you'll often find your friends and the people you lead are even more willing to work hard because they have top cover. They're protected by you. So be prepared to be tough with the mean kids if you have to. Eighth, as long as it's safe, let people tinker with the tools. You know, we had a pretty big lawn around our garden, and we had to mow that too. That became a lot easier for me when my brother figured out how to take the speed governor off of the riding lawnmower. Our airmen are bicycle mechanics. They tinker and fix things and solve problems in new ways. I've seen it on a hot flight line in Afghanistan and in the results of the Futures game in Dayton, Ohio. Let your people tinker with the tools. The ninth rule of gardening is if you're going to earn a 4-H ribbon at the county fair, you have to be able to explain your project. Over the past 2 years, we've tried to explain more to Congress, to industry, and to the public that what we need and why in plain English, without the dreaded acronyms, and in our stories. Every airman has a story. The Air Force we need has 386 operational squadrons. We are buying things faster and smarter. We are the best in the world at space, and our adversaries know it. I know a lot of you on the Air Staff have spent more time on Capitol Hill and in public and with reporters than maybe you have before. It takes practice. As leaders, you must be able to tell our story. My last rule of gardening is that you have to think about the long term. Gardening in 4-H teaches children delayed gratification. It takes months of hard work to get to that day when you get the water boiling on the stove before you even run down to pick the corn, and then you just savor the freshness with butter and salt. We were practical and mostly grew vegetables in our family, but there were grapes on the arbor we built next to the fence, and roses in front of the grapes that came back year after year. In fact, we didn't originally plant the grapes, and I'd wager those grapes are still there today. As a leader, you have to think about the long term, about stewarding the institution and planning succession, strengthening the positive culture and developing those who work with you, who will be here long after the first frost. To be a good gardener, to be a good leader, you have to accept with confidence that you will not be here to harvest all of the fruits of your labor. You improve the soil, plant some good things, engage some friends who may be here for a few more seasons, and develop in others an appreciation for the beauty of work well done on something good, something that matters. I will always be a gardener, and I will always be an American airman. You have the watch. May God bless you all, and may God bless the country that we love.
Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Air Force Honor Guard will now pass and review in honor of Secretary Wilson. The purpose of this review is to inspect the degree of drill proficiency of airmen and their state of readiness. As a reminder, everyone should stand as the colors pass before them. Military members in uniform should salute, while our civilian guests place their right hands over their hearts. Once the colors have passed, you may be seated. Please be seated. In appreciation for her courageous leadership, the men and women of the United States Air Force express their pride in having served alongside Secretary Wilson and assure her that she will always be an airman and a member of the Air Force family. At this time, the United States Air Force Band will now play a musical tribute in honor of Secretary Wilson's service. The men and women of the United States Air Force are proud to have served with Secretary Wilson and wish her and Mr. Hone every success in their future endeavors. Please rise for the playing of the Air Force song and the departure of the official party. This concludes today's ceremony. Please join General and Mrs. Goldfein in congratulating Secretary Wilson and Mr. Hone in the receiving line in front of the B2. There will be a reception immediately following on the left side of the hangar. Please remain at your seats until an usher directs you to depart. Thank you for your patience, and we wish you a pleasant day.